What's up everyone, Alex here. When I heard that Rune Factory 5 was going to be delayed to next year, admittedly I was a bit disappointed. But to be fair, there have been more games released in the genre since the original release of Rune Factory 4 that really built upon the existing formula for the genre, and quite honestly, we owe it to these games for improving all the other farming and crafting sims out there. Guitarria Fables is trying to be one of these games, with its uniquely cute aesthetic, and promising lots of freedom compared to other games in the genre, and more importantly, with better combat to boot. So in this video, I want to talk about how it plays, how it stacks up against other games like Rune Factory, Stardew Valley, or this year's Littlewood, specifically if it's more approachable than those games, my thoughts on it after several hours of playtime, all exclusively played by a co-op, and whether or not it is the next Rune Factory. Guitarria Fables is an action-adventure game featuring RPG and farming elements, which is going to be released on the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Series X and S, Switch, and PC on September 2nd, 2021. And I want to thank PCube for providing this game code for the PS5. So one big thing that the devs keep talking about is the freedom to do what you want. And if I knew how to play the game at the very beginning, that might ring true. However, for the people who are unfamiliar with this genre, you're going to be going through a lot of the story quests in the beginning, which will actually introduce you to a lot of the elements of gameplay, which is the combat and build system, as in you can create different combinations of magic and weapons to aid you in combat, crafting, and eventually, its farming mechanics. Admittedly though, I feel like Guitarria Fables is mostly combat-driven, with its story quests taking you to different places on the map. It actually didn't take long for us to find powerful monsters that we could barely damage. If you played any of the top-down Zelda games, the combat should feel familiar to you. You're equipped with a main weapon, you start off with a sword, and eventually you'll unlock the ability to use spells. And of course, utilize any equipped items during combat. You can change any of these provided that you're able to acquire them, and we'll get to that later. In order to swap out these abilities, you'll be using a spellbook that'll allow you to pick any of the unlocked spells and weapon skills and map them to specific buttons. As far as combat goes, enemies will occasionally show an area of attack, which actually allows you to dodge roll and evade these powerful hits. The entire dodge roll animation has a very generous invulnerability window, so if you're not used to that kind of attack and dodge gameplay, it'll be easy for you to get acclimated to this. That said, there are powerful enemies that seem to have an aura around them, and you'll soon encounter these early on in the game. While the combat is pretty easy and straightforward to pick up and play, being surrounded by these enemies is quite hard to deal with, especially when there are multiple area of attack markers on the ground, and just a culmination of the amount of damage that you're receiving from so many opponents. I can honestly say that you can get easily overwhelmed, which necessitates creating better weapons and armor. While the moment-to-moment combat is pretty fun, the environments unfortunately obscure gameplay. In most games, when you go behind an object, that object typically becomes transparent so you can see through it. But with two players, we found that we had to coordinate a bit more to make sure that we both had good visibility during combat, because there are sections of the game where, due to the positioning of the camera and the speed in which it takes objects in the foreground to become transparent, it made for a combat experience that shouldn't be this much work. As far as the story goes, I feel like the story is a bit intriguing, albeit a little light. As you can probably imagine, the beginning of the game is on par with most games in the genre, with you taking over a relative's farmland, which is a common trope. The overarching story, however, talks about a conflict between the ruling empire and an encroaching calamity, which is causing animals to act erratically. But outside of that framework, story quests are mostly focused on establishing your character in Paw Village and realizing your full potential. With that said, there is an element to the story that asks you to venture further away and explore numerous dungeons, much like Zelda. With regards to farming and crafting, crafting is done by approaching corresponding townsfolk, whether it's a blacksmith to make new weapons or armor, or a chef to make food to survive the perils of the outside world. The catch-22 is, of course, gathering materials, and that's where some strange things occur. For example, there are several quests and recipes early on that require a lot of logs. And unfortunately, just based off of where I was in the story at the time, there were really only 2 to 3 trees that you can chop down, and they're all located within town, which is quite strange given that there are a lot of trees outside of town, but none of which you can actually chop. And the trees in town don't grow back quick either, and this is causing me problems and preventing me from making new items or even progressing through the quests that I mentioned. This is all to say that there is definitely a lack of biomes early on that'll help you with resource gathering. Keep in mind, I'm not asking the game to hand me all the ingredients. However, because of the strange limitations with gathering resources, it feels very inorganic and artificial as a result. Conversely though, farming is actually fairly intuitive. You plant crops, you water them daily, you harvest them, and a lot of these crops are mostly used in cooking. All of your farming tools are conveniently stored in a chest nearby, and there's also a well to replenish water for your watering can. In case you're wondering, there are different weather systems in the game, so there will be times when your crops will be watered for you, which, that's always great. With regards to planting seeds, you'll actually have a range within a 3x3 grid, and if you have at least 9 seeds of that type, it'll just automatically fill in that 3x3 grid from left to right, top to bottom, which is actually quite convenient. A mechanic that's actually common in games of this type is a fatigue mechanic, which kind of forces you to go to sleep and kind of close the books on the previous day. Fortunately, there is no fatigue mechanic in Kytaria Fables. You can literally stay up and away from town however long you want. The game also features a day and night cycle, and of course, you can sleep and finish off the day. Sleeping replenishes your health and magic, which is always welcome, especially after a day of exploring dungeons and challenging areas. With regards to couch co-op, that is available right away, but in my opinion, the co-op partner feels secondary to the experience. Now, I will say that a lot of this is common in games of the genre that have this feature. In this case, I was player 2, and because of that, I couldn't stray too far away from player 1. I would basically just automatically warp to where player 1 was. Unfortunately, the game doesn't split the screen or even zoom out a little bit to kind of compensate for both players doing different activities, and I'm kind of hoping that in a future update they'll address that, because what's actually happening is that there's a loss of independence for the second player. However, there are concessions, right? Like when the first player actually makes a weapon or armor, the second player has immediate access to it. Strangely enough, when we started this co-op game, there was a save that was created specifically for my character on my account, but none of the progress that I made on player 1 carried over to mine. We ran into a problem in the game where I tried to farm with player 1 and there were no additional tools for me to use. In other words, there were no 2 pickaxes, no 2 watering cans, so we kind of had to delegate what tasks each of us did. And unfortunately, based off of our experience, there was no way to obtain the same basic level tools unless player 1 actually upgrades theirs and leaves these tools in the box, which is a bit of a shame. In an effort to make the game more approachable, Kytaria Fables might have made things more frustrating to players who are used to the conventions of the genre for the reasons I've mentioned. And even if you take a different perspective and say that it's really more of a Zelda game with crafting and farming elements, your progress through the game's story will have you engage with gathering requirements that might just feel too grindy and less straightforward than what players might expect. While Rune Factory it is not, there were some fun elements in Kytaria Fables that I loved more than others. I loved its combat, the potential of its story, and its charming aesthetics. But the little dings add up eventually. However, if the game follows its contemporaries, perhaps there is hope that these issues will be addressed in the future. Kytaria Fables is coming out on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Series X and S, Switch, and PC on September 2nd, 2021. If you enjoyed this video or if you have any comments regarding Kytaria Fables, please leave a like, post a comment, and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate each and every one of you watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next video.